BSA shares 2/3 with NAMBLA, an essay from my past, 5/26/2013. BSA shares 2/3 with NAMBLA of the letters in their initials. Both of my sons were Boy Scouts. Both learned many important life lessons, made many friends, developed skills, and aided their communities while participating in scouting activities. They both became Eagle Scouts and were active in Venture Crew, which is a scouting program for high school and college-age youngsters, and in our crew's case was also co-ed. No, one of my sons is not homosexual and the other heterosexual. They both seem very interested in female companionship, and for this I am happy. However, if one of my sons were homosexual, I would not exclude him from activities, nor would I ask him to lie about it, though, truth be told. I would not urge him to make it a conversation starter. I would include both my sons and urge them to follow the Boy Scout laws and to remember the Boy Scout oath. But the oath says to be morally straight, some outraged reader just muttered under his breath. This call to be straight is most definitely not aimed specifically at homosexuals. The terms straight and gay were not part of the lexicon back in 1907 when Baden-Powell started the Scouts that are the precursors to the BSA. I do not mean to suggest that homosexuality would have been considered morally correct, as it most certainly would not have been socially acceptable to the Western world at that time. What else might have been a deviation from morally straight? Divorce certainly was less common than Kinsey says the percentage of homosexuals in the population is. Divorce was impermissible. People lost their thrones over it. 2 decades later, Edward VIII abdicated his throne to marry a divorced American. Scandal! Children born to unmarried parents, illegitimate children, were impermissible. They didn't even have inheritance right. What fault had the children committed? They had been born. Scandal! Women working outside the home, voting, questioning the man who was responsible for them, all were impermissible. Scandal. Women must know their place. What was morally straight? Spare the rod, spoil the child. Using force within reason, of course, against one's wife. Smoking in the home around one's children and exposing them to secondhand smoke, all were perfectly acceptable in the first 2 cases urged by mores then common. If we reject boys for falling outside the morally straight guidelines, do we also then reject children who come from homes that do not meet the above standards? No, we do not. But that's not the boys, it's the parents, some of you utter, to which I utter hypocrisy. Inclusion in Scouts should not be a litmus test for boys. It should be an uplifting, educational, fun-filled expansion of their worlds. Does this mean that there are no standards for behavior for Scouts, for society, for eternity? Not exactly. What it does mean is rules are man-made, and we need to examine them for intent and for effect and alter them as society changes. I know this is contrary to absolutists. Well, I am sorry to disillusion you, but man made up the absolutes which you think have been handed down since man first appeared on this earth, whether 6,000, 6 million, or 60 million years ago. My God versus your God, my book versus your book aside, let's look at what we are trying to create and see if our actions are leading us in the right direction. If all the aforementioned sins are contrary to be morally straight, and being morally straight is a prerequisite to a boy's admission into Scouts, then it follows that those who do not meet these prerequisites should be denied entry into Scouting. We need to separate the chaff from the grain, don't we? I do not believe excluding boys because they are different is the effect we wish to have, which is why I am pleased that the BSA has decided to include boys who identify themselves as homosexual. I am also pleased that the BSA urges boys to be chaste. They are little boys in the early years, and while I understand that they are not sexless little beings, we don't need to make life a vast, never-ending sifting of acceptable people and unacceptable people. Would I have a problem if either of my sons was homosexual? Sadly, I would, but I would not reject him. I would not stop loving him, and maybe, after years of trying to convince him that he's just a little confused, I would accept him. Sorry, I'm just being honest here. I'm a middle-aged Midwesterner, and I have had my prejudice reinforced for a long time. Health issues are addressed in Scouting, and protection of our boys from adults and one another is a big part of 21st century Scouts. This will not change because we become more inclusive, though perhaps the understanding that all boys have worth might be a welcome and resultant change. The next step is the acceptance of openly homosexual leaders. I know it will happen and the outcry will be for the safety of the boys. The underlying message there is the absurd, hate-filled notion that homosexuals are perverts and pedophiles with nothing wholesome to offer our boys. A lie that is as absurd as the Scouts' terrible history of not protecting our boys from heterosexual normal leaders a generation ago. The current BSA has background checks in place for leaders. They have policies where a single boy should never be alone with an adult. 2 deep leadership programs where adults, whenever possible, are there to chaperone one another as well as the Scouts. The BSA has come to realize that they have an obligation to vet volunteers, and they take that obligation seriously. We need to take our obligation of inclusion seriously and not allow our fear of the different get in the way of embracing boys and volunteers who want to help. There are a lot of ways to be morally straight, and helping boys see this is an important lesson. Monday, July 27, 2015, BSA National Executive Board ratifies resolution removing the national restriction on openly gay leaders and employees.